what do you think are some of the biggest myths about zoning?
So, zoning, people always think is also kind of set in stone. Like, this has always been commercial. It will always be commercial. It'll be commercial until the end of time and kind of things. And it's not really the case. It could be residential to commercial to an industrial to a mixed use to something else down the line. So as the city changes and evolves, zoning changes and evolves with it.
Welcome to Lawrence Real and Local, Keeping It Real podcast presented to you by the Lawrence Board of Realtors. We're your go-to source for all things real estate in Lawrence, Kansas. I'm Lexie Haskin with Bank Midwest.
And I'm Patrick Dipman with McGrew Real Estate. Together, we are here to make the journey to homeownership a breeze. Join us as we share insider insights, expert advice, and a dose of fun along the way.
This episode was brought to you by...
Insurance can feel complicated, but getting the right coverage doesn't have to be. I'm Ryan Spark, owner of the Spark Agency with Farm Bureau Financial Services.
And I'm Thea Lease, Senior Account Exec at the Spark Agency. Since 2013, we've helped families and businesses in Lawrence make confident insurance decisions.
We're proud of the long-term relationships we've built and being there when clients needed us most.
Call us at 785-841-0073 for a simple, no-pressure review. We'd love to help.
Welcome to Lawrence Real and Local, Keeping It Real podcast by the Lawrence Board of Realtors. My name is Lexie Haskin with Bank Midwest.
And I'm Patrick Dipman with McGrew Real Estate.
And we are joined here today with Jeff Crick, and he is I'm going to actually read your official title, the Planning and Development Services Director. Mm-hmm. So I got that right.
Yeah,
I wrote it down correctly.
Of Lawrence.
Tell us about yourself. How'd you get to where you are? Just what you like to do for fun. Just let us know.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Western Kansas. So Lawrence is not my hometown, even though I probably lived here longer than anywhere else I've ever been at this point.
Then you can still be considered a townie.
Do I get credit for that?
Where are you from in Western Kansas?
Liberal Kansas.
Okay.
Way
I know it well. I'm from
Yeah.
from Central, which people consider Western, Larned. So you probably driven through there at some point in your life.
Yeah, usually liberals is another one you drive through on your way to somewhere else. I understand it, but I'm from way out there. I went to KU, got my degrees here, and then from there I got lucky and got a job in Columbia, South Carolina, working in planning and development services there for about 6 or 7 years. And then somehow got real lucky and got to come back and start working here. And I've been here ever since. And so I started with the city of Lawrence and Douglas County as a planner too. Then also became the planning manager, which oversees the day-to-day operations for the division, and then got real lucky and got to serve as the director of planning and development services.
Well, we are very happy to have you here, and this episode is also part of the special series that we've been doing. And today we're going to be talking about zoning made simple, what it is, why it matters, how it changes, and even over the past year, there have been different zoning changes and codes and all the fun things. So things. Yeah.
So for anybody that's listening, what does zoning mean?
The easiest way I've ever heard it described. Zoning is the way that cities kind of tell people how things will develop and change, is the best way to put it. It's really, on the surface is, where do we want things built and how? And that's really the bare basics of it.
What is zoning designed to do exactly? I mean, I know you said that it's designed to show us what the city's vision is for growth, but what is it not designed to do? Like, let's reverse that. Like, what is it not designed to do?
That's a great way to kind of think about it. Most people think zoning can do quite a lot of different things that it really is not able to do. It won't be where you can set an owner-occupied or residential or rental property. It doesn't do that. It doesn't control behavior. A lot of people think that there's something in there that says, this will be a party house. We can zone it in a certain way. That's not a function of zoning. That's a function of the property's use. A lot of people look at it as a way of ensuring property values, and that's not a guarantee in the way that the market works, and zoning can't really do a lot of things that people give it credit for sometimes that it can do there. It also doesn't really change how HOAs work. So if you have a homeowners association, that's a different agreement and altogether, and it's on top of zoning in a lot of ways. So zoning doesn't do a lot of those things. What it does do is it gives you what you can do with your property and then defines what's called the building envelope. So how you can build on your property, how big it can be, what your setbacks can be, how many stories tall, where do you need how much parking, and where do you need the parking to be at. But the thing to remember about zoning is zoning isn't a specific use. it gives you a menu of possible uses. So when you talk about like a residential zoning, you're probably getting some various residential uses in there. If you talked about what's called mixed use zoning, it's residential plus some commercial uses in there. So it's not saying that you will forever be, a coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
You could be a coffee shop or an office or an apartment building or something else. So that's kind of how way zoning typically works in the United States.
Yeah.
Well, in another episode, you mentioned the Sims or Sim City. But as you were explaining that, I was thinking about how Lawrence is just historically laid out with Mass Street and where there's the commercial buildings. And then you're talking, then I started thinking in my own brain, because I overthink things, and I think, wonder how it was laid out in South Carolina. And then, but in Northeast, for instance, I've heard of a lot of different mixed use stuff just traditionally. And then you're talking about the United States where you go, overseas or somewhere else, and the zoning is much older than that or didn't exist.
It's very different. Even like when you go from like Topeka to Kansas City to Lawrence, it will be dramatically different. And it's really the best way to think about it. It's tailored to the town it's in. It's what that community sets as its expectations. So what works in Lenexa won't work in Lawrence. And what we see people always do is when they're like, I see this over here. Why can't I bring it? Well, yes, you can, but there's just a little bit of a different way to do it. It's a little bit tailored to us. Yeah. But even when you go like Maine to California, it's going to be light years different potentially.
What's the difference, or like what is the process if somebody did want to bring something from a different town and that type of zoning and what it looks like to our town? What would that process look like? I
like real examples because it's just always easier to talk about. But, I'm very, my family says very food motivated. So I always think about, let's open a restaurant. What does that look like?
I've went on actual like vacations just to go try places on the Food Network. So I understand.
Same kindred spirit in that respect there. So it's always like, how do I open this taco restaurant? How does this going to work here? And what every place will have in their zoning is called a use table. And a use table will say, what are you going to be? If you're a restaurant, what kind of restaurant? Sometimes they get very specific. Is it a drive-through restaurant or a sit-down restaurant? Then you kind of figure out where that is. In Lawrence, we're a restaurant. We just kind of chalk that up. Find what your use is, and then you look across the table, and it'll say, these are the zoning districts where that use is permitted. And then you look and kind of, okay, I'm in M1, I'm in M2, and so on and so forth. You pull up the map, and that'll tell you where the properties are at that are zoned that in the community. And you can kind of start honing in on, okay, this is where I can be at. I want to try to be over here because I know from market research, this is good for me. This is where my base is at. This is where I will have the really good exposure to get people to come by. And that kind of sets the ball in motion on that one. So once you kind of get your use defined and where your zoning districts are, you can use the maps to really figure out this is where I want to be, or, well, this looks really good, but it doesn't have my zoning district. And then I can maybe go in there and change that. And so there's a lot of different ways to go about that, but that's really kind of the opening start to everything.
So they have to go to like a planning commission meeting to get a zoning changed if they want to, or do they just come like knock on everything like, Jeff, I need this zoning changed now?
As much fun as the second one would be, it's not actually how that works. I'd say. So in the way that it typically works in Kansas is zonings are set by the governing bodies, by the city commission. And a lot of times what it is, planning commission will do what's called a recommendation going up. And so the process for Lawrence is, I give you that one pretty easy. You come into the office and talk with the planner of the day. The planner of the day is just a planner we have available 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, and they're there to just answer questions. And you just say, I'm opening this restaurant. What do I need to know? And they'll start doing that. They'll look for what the use is, goes through that, kind of help you as part of that. And then if you find a spot and you're like, well, that's not the zoning district, but it looks like it could be a really good spot for me. And that's when you can start the rezoning process. And it's just an application that you can submit to the planning office. And then we schedule you for a planning commission meeting. And that's where they go for the recommendation. And as part of anything that goes to planning commission, we have to present a staff report. Staff's got to go through a series of questions that are out there. We have to answer those, and we have to make a professional recommendation. So everything we got to do up to that point is really compelled by the state law, compelled by our local codes, and we've got to go through all those little steps to get to that point. Planning commission will then hear the case, and they will go, okay, we'll see what this is. It looks like it's aligning with our comprehensive plan. We've got other corridor studies or neighborhood things that we're looking at. This looks like it meets all of those. And they'll recommend or not recommend that to the governing body. And ultimately, the governing body can approve that. And when they do that, they go through first readings and second readings and publications, which are all the kind of the paperwork side. And then once it's rezoned, all those uses that were permitted in that district are now available to that property. And then that's when you kind of go through all those next stages, like building codes and permits and those kind of things.
So it is quite a process. That sounds kind of like a long process a little bit. Can it be a longer process, or what is the shortest time frame you've ever seen it rezoned?
Ooh, I think shortest I've ever seen is about 4 months.
That's actually pretty decent.
Was there a building already there at that point, or?
In that case, I think so. But usually the process is right around 4 to 6 months. At its fastest clip, you're right around 4. If you kind of run into the holidays sometimes, you might gain a week or two and get towards that 6. It's just a matter of like what time of year you're into. But rezonings are usually about 4 to 6 on their normals.
That's actually not bad.
Well, that I was wondering then, let's pretend that there is a building there. Is there, if somebody gets a permission to put a business there, is that potentially just a one-time deal? I mean, rezoning sounds like it's permanent, but is there something that is instead a special use opportunity that I can have so I can open my taco shop? But if I fail, then maybe it goes back to something else.
So the zoning runs with the land. So let's say I come in and I open my taco restaurant and I'm not successful, which, let's face it, I would eat I wouldn't sell anything. I would just clean out my entire.
Just eat the tacos.
I would be horrible at that one. And then, I'm like, I'm going to let somebody rent this and maybe have a better chance at it there. Another restaurant could turn around and come right in as part of that because the zoning is already in place there. But let's say that it's like in your instance there's something else in there. You're like, oh, it could be this too, maybe a dry cleaner or something like that. But it says it's a special use permit. So special use permits are discretionary. They're not obligated in the same way like an administrative approval is, like a site plan, or even sometimes in the rezoning categories. If you have a permitted by right use, like a restaurant or an office, you can just kind of come and go with those as long as you don't need building permits or any kind of changes in things. You can just file it, you're in, you're out, and you're on your way. Special use permits go through the same process as rezoning. So if the property is zoned for a special use, then it's the same process. You go to planning commission, then you would go to the governing body for the approval, but they're discretionary. And city commission can put time limits on those. They can put restrictions on those. So like, you can operate till 11 o'clock at night, or no loud music, or, usually those are kind of the big ones that you'd run into. And then they can put a time limit on it too. Sometimes special use permits can be in perpetuity. They can run for a while. As long as that use is there and stays in business and doesn't close down, you're good to go. Sometimes they'll put a time limit. We'll give it a 5-year trial and see what it is. And that's really at the discretion of the governing body.
Is there, because first thing I think of, if something's going in my neighborhood, what's that going to do for parking and traffic? I would assume the city probably has some rules about maybe it's occupancy and how many vehicles could, fit or not fit there.
That's a function of zoning. And it really gets down to what is the use that you have and then what are the rules that are expected in those uses. And so probably about a year ago, actually, we're getting close to about a year over on this one. We just did the land development code and kind of retooled how parking works. So if you're a commercial use in a commercial district, there's no parking minimum required. So if you know your business and you need to do 5 spaces or 50 spaces, you can come in and say, hey, here's where I need to be at probably to be successful. There are some rules on residential. So if you have a house or a duplex, you do have to provide some parking, but not to a higher degree as what you saw in the previous zoning code that we had. The numbers have changed a little bit going across the board there. We also kind of realized that you're going to get those uses that are commercial, but they're going to be in a neighborhood, a coffee shop, a restaurant, and those kind of things. And so some of the parking is related on that. So if you're a commercial use in a residential zoning district, you do have to provide some parking because of those exact reasons. Because you get a lot of people. If you're really successful as a restaurant, you might fill up a street.
Yeah.
Not a horrible thing potentially, but it also could be hard if you're trying to find parking and you're trying to get your groceries from your car to your door. And that could be, a little bit of a conflict. So there are some of that, but it's all really governed by the zoning itself.
Makes sense.
Can you walk us through some of the most common zoning that people might be hearing about? So single family, multifamily, commercial, mixed use.
Yeah. So not a lot of places will have the same ones, but generally you'll get into what's called the single family zoning districts, or the single detached dwelling districts is what it typically shows up as. It is really, it's what you think of as a house on a lot. It kind of, when you think of a neighborhood, you might think of that first and kind of those there. Multifamily zoning is what most people think of as an apartment complex, but in all honesty, multifamily zoning could also be a duplex or a triplex, or in case of some places here in Lawrence, it could be a single family house itself. It just has a little bit more permissive rights in the way that it works through there. So it can be a little varied in there. Zoning codes have really started to kind of go away from single family or multifamily zoning, because you see those transitions where, well, I want a duplex and I want a house and I want this over here and I need and the way that the world works now isn't necessarily always in the same kind of spot there. So what we see from developers frequently is, I want to set this neighborhood up to be somewhere I can live in from the moment I come to town to the moment I want to decide to move. So if I come as a college student, I've got a spot to live. I need a studio place. I need a smaller place. Well, okay, I've got a family now and I need a little bit more space. Or I'm getting older. I'm trying to age in place and stay in my neighborhood. So they try to give a variety of different kind of housing options in there. So you might live in your neighborhood your whole life and just kind of swap houses around. So zoning districts are kind of responding to that, where it's more about residential uses that are permissible and not so much about one or the other kind of a development type. Mixed use is kind of the opposite of that. It could be residential, it could be commercial, it could be, some degrees industrial, because sometimes we always think of industrial as being like an asphalt plant or nuclear reactors or something, real heavy, really something you don't want to live next to. But in all honesty, Waxman candles could be an industrial user if they're making candles sometimes. So you run into things that you don't think of being industrial, they get classified as that. So Mass Street's a great example of somebody that has residential, commercial, and industrial probably within 50 feet of everybody at all times.
When you started talking about, this is like a slight tangent, has kind of what to do, but I was listening to this story about this guy who bought like 180 pounds of cheese and he needed to get them all like split up. It was a really like aged cheese, and he took it back to his house and he had to get like an industrial fridge put into his apartment. And then his landlord came in with so many, he's like, your house is not zoned to be like industrial use, or you can't be doing like this cheese business out of your house.
Then he set up a cheese shop in it.
And he was like, you can't control how much cheese I want to eat. This isn't industrial. I'm having all this cheese for myself, when really he was trying to sell this cheese. Yeah. So you're talking about like an industrial use with like Waxman, if they're making their wax. It reminded me of that story with the cheese and the industrial size fridge for this cheese. Just a little interesting. So, if like Lexie.
I've not run into cheese yet for industrial use, but it's possible, I guess, if you were trying to make it.
Well, that kind of goes back to, I read this book a number of years ago but what it talked about was just like city expansion over time. And when a lot of cities were first established, people like lived where they could walk to work. And so that's why you see so much of like you said, like industrial, commercial, residential, all right there, because people were not jumping in a car and taking off down the road. So that makes a lot of sense. And then I started thinking of even like today, where there's the accessory dwelling units, where there are people with, you said, aging in place. There are people that cost of living in like the retirement homes is very high. So they'd like to have a family member live with them, or somebody that spent time in special education for a number of years. Is you want to offer somebody who might have a disability independence, but also not sit, you don't want to just leave them in an apartment if they can be, very self-sufficient in your backyard in an ADU or something like that.
Yeah. And it's one of the things we were trying to really get when we were rewriting the code, was to really give those options and choices. We, heard there's any number of ways people are using things nowadays that we didn't think of. Last code was written in 2006, so it's really early 2000s. The world really changed since then. And exactly, the ADUs are, we get people that are, I know one that has, individual has an in-home nurse that instead of trying to find somewhere, they have that unit. So when that person is staying with them, they don't have to find a hotel. They're right available. They don't, there's a little bit more family atmosphere for that individual. But really the way that we kind of go about it has changed quite a bit in the last years. And I always describe zoning, it's a little bit like a car. If you get a car from 2006, You're getting probably like power windows and like an actual key.
Yeah.
And maybe the lever that opens the trunk if it's a really fancy car, And nowadays you get the touch screen and you don't even have a key and the car somehow knows what you want to do. And that's how zoning codes also work. It's like we've learned over the years since 2008 from the recession what did or didn't work. We saw what worked and didn't work in the pandemic. So what's that next iteration look like? And when you start talking about those things, and residential is one great example of it, but commercial is the same way. Things really changed in the office market, really changed in the way that people go about just daily business, and our code needs to respond to that new world a little bit. So zoning really is a little bit like that. It needs to evolve and go. And the one thing I always really press on stuff is people think zoning's a one and done. Once you write it, it's done, it's settled, it's over with. It can be amended at any time. It can be rewritten at any time. And one of the things that the planning staff is always looking for is what's working and what's not. If we were trying to get a certain thing out of the code, a certain response out of it, and we're not getting it, let's fix it. If we're not getting what we thought we would want for the building product, let's fix that too. So it's never in stone. It is always under review. It's always something we're taking a look at. So even if the zoning doesn't quite give us what we want, we can always go in there and kind of rework it to see if we get what we like.
For those people that might not be familiar with some of the zoning changes that have been made in the recent years, what would you say are the big highlights of those?
Oh, that's fun. One of my favorite questions, honestly.
You're like, okay.
Exactly. Take a moment, take a breath, get right now. It's, I think really the big ones for us are we really opened up the doors to ADUs. It used to be in a very specific set of zoning districts, and it used to be in some very certain circumstances with some very odd sizing limits sometimes. That's all changed. Accessory dwelling units are pretty much permissible in all the residential districts and a lot of our mixed-use districts too. We changed the way that we handle parking. I kind of talked about it. We went from parking minimums to parking maximums. We changed the way that we do the calculations because parking is a sunk cost. If you make somebody do a parking space, it's usually $5,000 to $7,000 of just material and insurance and things that go along with it. So $5,000 times 10, it starts to add up over the course of that. And if you know you don't need that many parking spaces, why is the code making you put that much in there when you don't really need it? That's just cost you're not going to recoup. So let's bring that down a little bit. The other part was we went through our use table and looked at, and kind of we were talking about this earlier between single family and multifamily. We kind of removed some of those stops that we would typically see. So now you can do duplex by right in all of our residential districts. You can do some different housing types in different districts that you couldn't do before. So hopefully that gives people some more options and some more choices to kind of move down those options to kind of look at a property and go, that could be something different than what it used to be, or I could probably get this to work a little bit more. And one of the things we did was we changed the lot sizes and the setbacks and stuff around that, because if you can kind of maneuver the house or maneuver a property in a way that makes it work better to be marketable or to get a product on there, it's going to be really interesting in the market. We wanted to kind of get those out of the way because large setbacks kind of set away a lot of that land and then you can't use it. Well, what if I want to be closer, or if I want to be more walkable? How do I kind of make that work? And then let's modify those setbacks. Let's see if we can kind of rework that site a little bit differently. So a lot of big changes, we think, on those fronts.
Yeah.
When you hit on some really key reasons to update it, how did you even start updating it? Like, did you look at other cities' plans? Did you take in like public comment or public input? Like, that thing's huge. So how do you
She's like, how did you start sorting through this and say, this needs a change, that needs a change?
I know we need to update this. I got some ideas of how we can update this.
Jeff's looking at this, he's like, this sucks.
And really for people to know, how long did it take to go through that process?
So the process, we wanted to go fast through the process because the last code we started in 2000, it didn't get adopted in 2006. And that's a lot of time to sit on the sidelines going, what's next? What is it going to look like? Is it going to be something I want to use? And so we wanted to make this one go quicker than the last time we did it. It took us about 27 months to go from beginning to the end process on that one. And we wanted to do that because, to kind of just get it over with, because it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of engagement. And we wanted to make sure the community could see us making positive changes, or at least having discussions. They might not have always liked the changes, but at least we're doing this. We're trying to make something work here. We're trying to find a compromise sometimes. So we did it really fast. We had a consultant that came in and helped us as part of that. But really what happened was, I'm going to say 5 years, and I'm probably not even being, it's probably even longer than that. Before that, we were always kind of keeping this list of, if I could change it, this is what I would do. Or I don't know why we're doing it this way. It doesn't work that well. And we're hearing from a developer that says this doesn't work at all. So let's put it on the list. Or we would sit there and go, I see what they're trying to do, but it didn't quite, the language didn't meet the intent. And so we had a list. And so when we started meeting with the consultant, it was one of those, kind of like airing of grievances from Seinfeld a little bit, where it was like, we have all these things that we've got complaints about, and we would love to find a solution to it. Or even is it needed anymore? Some of the stuff we just looked at and we go, well, we haven't used that since before this code was even written. We don't even know why it's in here anymore. So maybe we need to just pare that out. And so we kind of started with that. So it had been bubbling for a while, but we really went into the process for about 27 months or so.
That makes sense.
Have you guys used AI or any of that to help figure out some different solutions or anything like that? Or say how could we make this better? Or how do you think this could, just to play around with it? Did you use any of that to kind of help make any decisions, or were you just no, humans?
It was all human based. I don't know if AI wasn't on my radar when we were doing it at that point. What we really was just doing, we would just sit down and we'd have conversations with people, and we would just, anybody that would sit and talk with us. And, we talked with people that do residential remodeling. We talked with realtors. We talked with business owners or property owners and neighborhood associations, anybody that would sit down and just kind of have a conversation. We were just like, what would you like to get out of this? What do you see as we're getting this from the code and it's not working. It is not doing us any favors. Or what's really great in here? This is the thing we want to make sure gets carried from one to the other. And so it was really just a lot of talking. And then, you'd ask, did we look at other places a little bit? We did to some degree, but again, everything we looked at had to get tailored to us. So while there might have been the philosophy or the theory behind it, we still had to figure out, okay, well, how does that work under Kansas law? And how does that work with the way that Lawrence wants to do its code? And so there might be an element or a nugget of something, but we really had to bring it and kind of go, okay, we need to make this our own and we need to make this work for us. And then how do we do all of that? So there's some parts that you can kind of look at and go, that looks like that might be something I've seen somewhere else.
It's a nice concept.
Right. But we got to then put the Lawrence stamp on it to make sure it does what we want it to do.
Correct.
So you talked about having to talk to people, getting to talk to people. But what would you say, when should residents or stakeholders engage in these conversations with the planning and just to be most effective?
The moment an application comes in or you have an interest in something. I mean, the best way to describe it is frequently and often. And we loved when people reach out to us, even if it's just questions or want to know more or just want to tell us what they thought about. We would love for people to reach out, at the very earliest and then stay engaged throughout. And I know it's hard to stay engaged over a process that takes a few months, but projects evolve quite a bit sometimes as they're going through the process. And we want to make sure that everybody's got the same information and just any time. And that's why we always have the planners available. And probably a lot of people who are listening know you get to see the yellow signs that show up in the yard and the letters that get mailed, and it's got someone's email address and a phone number on there. That's the planner working the case that was assigned to it. So you can call them and they can tell you where it's at, all the details about it, what's next, and it's all available.
Yeah.
And you can also get online on our website. We have a thing called Citizen Connect. You can go in there, plug in your address. You can see every rental license, building permit, planning submittal within a certain distance of your house. And if you want to be notified when a new one comes in, you can sign up on there.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
So if you just want to plug it in and kind of, set it and forget it.
One. Yeah.
You can just put it in there, sign up, and then anytime something pops in that area, it'll send you an email and say, hey, there's a new permit that was applied. So that's something we've got with the new technology that's very, very new to us, but it seems to be very well received too.
Yeah.
And so, we love talking with people, even if it's about, an ADU or, what were y'all thinking about this setback here? People think it's like, oh, I've got to have a project or there's got to be a reason to do that. No, you can just come in and we'll, walk through all the things. Like, what were you doing with parking? Or why do we do this and we don't do that? Or years ago, I had this gentleman walk in on one of the days where I actually was a pod and I got to do that. And we sat there for an hour talking about just why parking works at angles and why the dimensions on the lines change. And I was like, well, I wasn't expecting to have this conversation today. But let me tell you, when you go from a 45 degree to a 60 degree angle parking, the numbers all rearrange. And it was it was great. I got to, completely be a nerd about parking for
That's
an
neat.
hour. But it was just, he had a question and just wanted to know an answer. And so that's what we're here to do. We're here to help like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. You go, why was this put like this here? And why does that matter? And then they know that they can just come and talk to the planner of the day.
Absolutely.
You should just relabel it from your Seinfeld reference, like airing of grievances. Not that but obviously you want the positives, but that was a great analogy. Like,
that's what I can think about. That was our, we just kept the
you
list
can
on
be
the code.
Frank Costello if you want.
Yeah, we know everything in this code we would change if we were just, could do it. We would just have it.
Yeah.
It was a great list, but it also was just a wonderful leaping off point because we found out all the things that kind of drove us a little kind of like, oh, why are we doing this? Other people had the same thing. It wasn't just staff. It was the public and people that were trying to work. We were like, almost like there was we all don't like this part. We got to fix this.
Yeah. Well, and they're applying, a lot of people are, whether you're living it every day, like physically living, or you're working through it every day, you're going to find things that most people, like conceptually, that makes sense. I just hadn't thought of it that way.
Right. And we're still doing it with the new code. We're still in that early days of it. So we have a cleanup amendment
That's what I
going
was
right
wondering.
now is, we found things like we thought that was doing it, or we thought we had the phrasing. And now that you put it to a real project, we're like, oh, that's definitely not doing what we thought it was going to do. So staff is going through it right now to find ways to clean it up or change the language or even make it where it's more approachable in a lot of ways. So we're still not done. We're still trying to make it better, make it more, give us what we want out of it as much as we can.
Yeah. When you are going through making those changes with zoning and codes and things like that, at what point is it unproductive for people to come in and make comments or not have like solutions or have ideas on how to fix things or things like that?
I'm not sure there's really a moment where it's unproductive. I always worry about when people come to the last meeting before it's adopted and we haven't heard that idea yet, because then we're not sure is there something else that we need to pull on that thread a little bit more to find out? And we're already at this point, and have we inadvertently done something that maybe makes that better or worse? We don't know. So I always advocate for early and often, even in the conversations, because we work a problem and we start pulling on that thread and realize, oh, that's attached to something else, or well, that's a building code issue, which is a whole different book that we got to look at. And so it's like you pull on those and we just sometimes don't know what that end is going to be. But there's no real wrong time for that one, but the earlier, the better it is. And we can make sure we get all those things kind of figured out.
I had a question about one wish, and that sounds like the wish.
Yep.
Like, let's get after it early.
That could be. Also, if there was more restaurants in vicinity of like City Hall, that would not be necessarily a bad thing too. But
That's right.
There are a couple of restaurants where I was like, if I had these restaurants in town, I think I'd be set and I would never have to go anywhere else. One is a Fazoli's.
Yeah, I like that.
I love Fazoli's.
Yep.
Another is Fong's Pizza.
I've not had that.
It's Chinese pizza. It's in like Iowa, Des Moines. And I don't even know what the third one is. So it must just not be important to me anymore. But definitely Fazoli's and Fong's Pizza.
So my kids' wish would be buffet pizza. We
Yeah.
had one of those, but not anymore. So
I'm always just like, if I can just get restaurants right around me wherever I'm at, I'm happiest, because then it's like, I don't know what I want for lunch, but I like options.
but you got options. That's right.
I mean, COVID destroyed buffets. I mean, I'm thankful that we even have 2 Chinese buffets now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, it did.
Yeah, I guess you can tell we're hungry.
What do you think are, just as we wrap this up, some of the biggest myths about zoning or misconceptions?
It can do things. It's a superpower that it doesn't have. It's not going to affect ownership of a property. It's say it's going to be owner occupied or renter. That's really a different choice. I think that's one that a lot of people ask for. The one that I think it also is it doesn't really do aesthetics. People think it's like it needs to be a certain house of a certain design, and that's not really a function of zoning. Zoning is going to give you kind of your building envelope, how tall, how you locate it, those kind of things there. That doesn't dictate architectural style. That's a function of an overlay district potentially, like we're talking about.
Or a historical district, or
Exactly.
covenants and restrictions for neighborhoods.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of things that might be in that, but it's not really a zoning function at that point in time. Zoning doesn't ride with the use. That's a special use permit. So zoning is going to give you the menu we were talking about, but it's not going to say you've got to be a restaurant. That's really could be a special use permit, could be any number of things, but it really, it's not just a thing. And I think the one that I always try to impress when I'm talking to people is that planning commission doesn't decide things. People always think about planning commission being like, well, if we go there and this happens and it's all said and done, and it's like, no, this is just a step. That said and done is a lot later down the line. So stay engaged, keep in with the project. So, zoning people always think is also kind of set in stone. Like this has always been commercial. It will always be commercial. It'll be commercial until the end of time and kind of things. And it's not really the case. It could be residential to commercial to an industrial to a mixed use to something else down the line. So as the city changes and evolves, zoning changes and evolves with it. So what might have been commercial 30 years ago might need to be mixed use or go to industrial because we're finding out, we're really good at making this one widget or whatever it happens to be. Let's lean into that. So that was I'm trying to think of a really example I had in real life was a really large box retailer. And then it became a really good factory because it was just laid out in that way. So it went from commercial to industrial and that's not impossible. And then those can go from industrial to residential somewhere down the line too. So as cities evolve and we kind of change the way we kind of just do our day-to-day lives, zoning can flex with that too. So I'm not sure I got all the question answered.
No,
you did. You even went into a different question too about looking ahead. And I was like, wow, you just even answered smart zoning for our community.
Sorry about that.
No, sorry. Do you want to go into our fact or fiction segment?
Sure.
Let's do it.
Okay. Zoning changes happen easily and quickly.
Ooh, both fact and fiction. Not necessarily easy or quickly it could just vary by the project, but it could be, some might be fast and some might just take a while.
And so by fast, you talked earlier, like some things might be 3 or 4 months. And sometimes in some people's minds, that's not fast enough, but that's a pretty fast process.
That's a pretty fast process given the way that you go through these things under state statute and the way that the rules are written that we kind of have to kind of mesh our local rules to them. That's really pretty quickly on those things.
Yeah. Higher density can support affordability.
True.
Yes.
Let's see. Zoning only affects developers.
No, as fiction, I would say on that one. It affects all of us because if you change your zoning in a way and it's giving you a different product or a different way of you going about it, we could all be living with that.
Well, and the effects, there's positive and negative effects either way. Whichever way you flip.
I'm skipping the next one because we've already talked about it a lot. Zoning and building codes are different sets of rules.
Fact.
And then one thing we haven't really talked too much about, but this one popped up is zoning can influence housing affordability.
True. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think? Anything else? Anything you want to leave us with?
I would just always advocate if you have a question, even if it's not about a project, don't hesitate to give us a call. You can call our main line. We can get the planner of the day available. Even if you just want to talk about the angles of parking spaces, we're happy to sit down and do that. So people always think you can't reach out unless there's a thing. Like I said earlier, reach out. Even if it's just a question, you just like, why is this a thing? We'd love to be able to help and answer that. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out. And I get to work in a spot where I get to oversee and have conversations about building codes and planning and housing initiatives with affordable housing projects. So if there's any of those things too, we're definitely here to help on a lot of those different fronts, not just zoning and planning.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on and just speaking to this. And we're really excited to have you as a part of our series.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And the Spark Agency, Farm Bureau Financial, has also sponsored this series to help make this happen so we could inform the public about just the different things.
Thank you so much to them.
Thank you to Lawrence Public Library. Like, subscribe, share, make nice, constructive comments.
And follow if it's possible.
Darn it. I thought I got all of them. I thought I was trying to get to. Okay. Well, signing off.
Thanks for joining us on Lawrence Real and Local Keeping It Real podcast. We appreciate our guests taking the time to join us. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review if you enjoyed today's episode.
For more information, please visit us on the web at www.lawrencerealtor.com. And remember, whether you are buying, selling, or simply dreaming of buying your future home, we're here to help. Until next time, keep it real
And happy house hunting.